Story 1. The Person Upstairs. When I was 14, my parents finally decided I was responsible enough to stay home alone. It felt like a rite of passage, a small step toward adulthood. Our house in suburban Columbus, Ohio, was an ordinary two-story place with beige siding and a soft creak in the porch swing. Nothing spooky, nothing complicated, nothing that felt like it belonged in a scary story. At least, that's what I believed. The first few times I stayed home alone, I enjoyed the quiet. I'd sit on the couch, eat snacks I wasn't supposed to eat before dinner, and flip through channels with the remote like I owned the place. But every time without fail, a strange pattern would repeat itself after 20 or 30 minutes of silence. Faint noises would drift from the second floor. They were never loud. A soft creak, a subtle shift in the hallway, the gentle tap of something against a wall. I convinced myself it was the house settling. My mother always said newer houses made odd sounds as wood expanded and contracted, and I clung to that explanation like a lifeline. Still, the noises continued, and each time they happened only when I was alone. When my parents were home, the house remained silent, almost as if it didn't want witnesses. Eventually, I grew tired of doubting my own senses. One evening, when my parents left for a dinner downtown, I decided I would test the house once and for all. No television, no music, no distractions. I settled into the quiet living room and waited. For the first half hour, nothing happened. The stillness felt almost too perfect, like the house was holding its breath. As time crawled by, I relaxed. The quiet soothed me, and I even felt a little smug. Maybe my imagination truly had been the villain this whole time. Boredom nudged me to reach for the TV remote. My fingertips hovered inches away from it. And that was when the entire house seemed to explode into sound. A deafening crash thundered across the ceiling directly above me, as though something massive had been shoved violently across the floor. It wasn't the groan of pipes or the whine of wood shifting. It was forceful, intentional, unmistakably the sound of something or someone moving. Before I could process the impact, fast, heavy footsteps broke into a run along the upstairs hallway. Not casual movement, not random creaking. Someone was unmistakably sprinting. My mind went blank, except for one terrifying realization: there was a person upstairs. The next few seconds felt stretched and unreal. I stayed frozen ears, straining for any hint of movement. My heart hammered against my ribs, but the house grew sudden and completely silent, as though the intruder had stopped to listen. A cold clarity settled over me. If there was truly someone up there, they were now aware that I was downstairs. Staying still and waiting felt like the worst possible choice. I needed to give them a reason to leave fast. I moved quietly into the kitchen, grabbed the largest knife from the drawer, and stepped toward the front door. My hands trembled so badly that I nearly dropped the shoe I pulled off to wedge under the door frame. The idea was absurd and improvised, but it was all I had. Create the illusion that someone bigger, someone dangerous, someone capable was in the house. And not me. Once the door was propped halfway open, I took a slow breath and began a performance I never imagined I'd need. I deepened my voice, hardened my tone, and projected the confidence of someone threatening to call the police at any moment. It was an act, but I hoped whoever was upstairs couldn't tell. Afterward, I backed down the hallway and retreated into the bathroom. I locked the door gently, holding the knife tight in my palm, and stood completely still. My breath came in short, sharp bursts as I tried to hear past the blood pounding in my ears. Minutes crawled by, thick with tension. The house remained silent eerily, so as though the person upstairs was listening for my next move. I felt every muscle in my body coil with dread, waiting for the faintest sound of someone descending the staircase. Then, from the distance of the front room, I heard something shift wood, brushing against metal. A moment later, the front door closed with a heavy, deliberate thud. My chest tightened. The door could not have shut on its own. The shoe I had wedged there should have kept it from moving, unless someone had physically removed it. The silence that followed felt heavier than any footsteps. I stood frozen in the bathroom long after the sound faded. Part of me feared stepping into the hall in case the intruder was still inside, hiding in some other corner of the house. Another part of me feared discovering absolute proof they had been there at all. Eventually, with trembling hands, I cracked open the bathroom door. The hallway looked normal at first glance. Dim lamp lights spilling across the floorboards framed family photos, staring blankly from the walls. But as I moved toward the entrance, I saw my shoe lying slightly off to the side, no longer wedged under the door. The door itself was firmly shut. Someone had come down the stairs, removed the shoe, stepped outside, and closed the door. Someone who had been in the house with me the entire time. I locked every door, every window, every possible entry point. I switched on the alarm system, triple-checking the code even though I knew it by heart. Then I returned to the couch and sat there with the knife next to me, waiting for my parents, terrified to hear even the sound of my own breath. Weeks passed before the house felt normal again. Even then, every creak overhead tightened my chest. The memory of that thunderous crash, those racing footsteps, and the final shut of the door never faded. The scariest part wasn't the idea of ghosts or haunted places. It wasn't anything supernatural. It was the knowledge that someone real, someone living and breathing, had been in my home without permission. Someone who listened to me, pretending to be brave. Someone who chose to leave, but could just as easily have chosen not to. The house didn't settle that night. A stranger walked inside it. Story 2. The Van on Harbor Street. The night had started as nothing more than a casual escape from a long week on campus. Noah and his friends had just finished a grueling Thursday of lectures at their university in Melbourne. The semester was wearing everyone down, and a simple plan formed the way these things often do: leave campus, find a nearby bar, and try to feel human again. The place they picked was only a 5-minute drive away, a dimly lit pub tucked between a laundromat and a tattoo shop. It wasn't fancy, but it was familiar. Students flocked there out of habit more than preference. That evening, though, the bar felt unusually slow. No loud sports games on TV, no rowdy groups, just clusters of tired university kids slumped over half-filled glasses. Noah, always the restless one, suggested they head to a pool bar down the street. The idea sparked energy in the group, and within minutes everyone was gathering their things and piling into Noah's small car. The pool bar wasn't far, but parking was nearly impossible on a Thursday night. They circled the block twice before Noah finally found an open spot in a secluded side street, an alley framed by tall buildings that blocked out most of the street lights. The area had a reputation. Not dangerous enough to avoid entirely, but unsettling enough that students usually stuck to well-lit paths. Still, the nightlife nearby meant people were always around. Noah didn't think much of it. They parked and walked to the bar. For a while, the night was lighthearted again. The clack of billiard balls, neon reflections on polished tables, everything loud enough to drown out stress, but soft enough to avoid headaches. Hours slipped by until someone reminded the group that restaurants in the area closed early due to curfew regulations. They all agreed to grab pizza from a tiny shop under the bar, a place with a single open window connecting the inside to the street. Because the shop was cramped, half the group waited outside while the others went in to order. Noah stayed on the sidewalk, chatting through the window as his friends lined up inside. It was a peaceful moment. Warm food smells, soft chatter, the hum of passing cars. Then a large white van rolled past them and slowed to a stop directly beside the group. At first glance, the driver seemed unremarkable. Thin, with shoulder-length blonde hair and the kind of plain face that blended into crowds. But there was something off. He watched Noah with too much interest, leaning slightly toward his open window. The man asked for help with something trivial, something Noah instantly knew made no sense. The request involved a parking spot behind the van, one far too small for a vehicle of that size. No experienced driver would need another person to confirm that. Noah felt a prick of unease. The interaction stretched longer than it should have. The man insisted. Noah declined. A subtle back and forth unfolded each second, thickening the discomfort. Finally, the man yanked the van's handbrake and stared silently at them for an uncomfortably long moment before driving away. The conversation inside the pizza shop went quiet as soon as Noah's friends stepped back outside. Their expressions mirrored his uneasiness. Still, they forced laughs, brushed it off, and focused on the food. After everyone ate, they split up. Some chose to stay near the bar and request an Uber home later. Noah and 3 others decided to call it a night and walk back to the car. As they left, a homeless man near the corner approached them. He reassured them in an oddly insistent way that they had nothing to worry about regarding the man in the white van. His attempt at comfort accomplished the opposite. The group exchanged glances, feeling their nerves heighten. They continued toward the alleyway. The moment they turned into the side street where Noah had parked, their stomachs sank. The white van was there again, this time parked crookedly, half on the sidewalk, half off a rear door, slightly open. The driver stood nearby, his earlier mild expression replaced with something harder to read. Something colder. Noah attempted a light-hearted remark as they walked past, something meant to diffuse tension, but the man didn't react. He kept his eyes fixed on them, tracking each step. When the group rounded the corner and saw Noah's car at the far end of the alley, things escalated. The van's rear door creaked a little wider. 4 men who had been leaning against the brick wall beside it straightened and began following the group. They had blended into the shadows earlier unnoticed. Now they were moving as if receiving an unspoken cue. Noah's pulse spiked. The 4 men closed the distance quickly, but not aggressively enough to cause a scene, just enough to signal intent. His friends instinctively quickened their pace. Noah forced himself to remain steady. Instead of running, he slowed slightly, pretending to search his pockets for the car keys, calling out to the others with a casual tone as if nothing was wrong. He hoped the men behind them would believe they hadn't noticed the danger. Inside, he felt the opposite of calm. When Noah finally saw his car, clearly, adrenaline surged. He whispered for everyone to run. In an instant, all 4 of them sprinted. The keys slipped once in Noah's hand before he jabbed the button and unlocked the doors. The group piled inside, slamming them shut. The doors locked just as the men reached the vehicle. The moment the locks clicked, fingers curled around door handles. Shadows crowded the windows. Noah started the engine, hands slick with sweat. He didn't wait to think. He backed up just enough to swing out of the alley and sped away. In the rearview mirror, he saw them still standing there, their silhouettes rigid and unmoving. A 5th figure appeared by the van, someone they hadn't seen before, someone who had been waiting further down the alley. The realization hit Noah with a cold wave. If they had been delayed by only a few seconds, if a key had dropped, if someone had stumbled, if the car hadn't unlocked in time, the story would have ended differently. As they drove home, no one spoke. The silence pressed down on them, a reminder of how close they had come to being surrounded, cornered, and forced into a van with no witnesses on a dark side street. Later that night, Noah tried to convince himself it had been a robbery setup, nothing more. But something about the men's coordinated movements, the van's strange positioning, and the way the driver had reappeared at the exact moment they returned made him think otherwise. Their intention felt darker, more deliberate, something that didn't belong to simple street crime. The kind of silent threat that lingers in the mind long after footsteps fade. Story 3. The Man with the Computer Voice. Ethan never imagined his first year of college would become the story that defined his 20s and eventually haunted his 30s. He had enrolled at a large state university in Arizona in 2003, choosing the school less for academics and more for the nightlife, the sports culture, the promise of freedom. After years of strict routines, early practices, and the pressure of high school sports, he wanted to breathe. And the campus seemed like the perfect place to disappear into a crowd and live without expectations. For the first month, his life unfolded in all the usual ways. Sleep-deprived mornings, loud parties, late-night food runs, and friendships that felt instant and effortless. His roommate Tyler snored like a chainsaw, but Ethan didn't mind. Their dorm building buzzed with life, and every night the hallways carried laughter music and the faint smell of cheap beer. Then, somewhere in mid-September, everything shifted. It began with a phone call. Not a cell phone, those were rare among students then, but the beige landline attached to the wall above Ethan's desk. It rang in the middle of the night with an oddly mechanical rhythm. Half asleep, Ethan answered with the lazy confidence of someone expecting a drunk friend. What he heard instead pulled him fully awake. A voice, flat and unnatural, spoke his name in a tone that mimicked the robotic cadence of an outdated GPS system. The words were simple, but the delivery felt cold and calculated, as if someone had programmed each syllable rather than spoken it. Ethan tried to brush it off. Maybe a prank. Maybe someone down the hall messing with him. He hung up and went back to sleep. But the calls continued. At first, they came once a week, then twice, then every few days. Each time the voice repeated his name, adding strange statements that never quite formed full threats, but carried clear intent. The tone never changed, always monotone, always emotionless, as though the caller was reading from snippets of pre-recorded lines. After the third or fourth call, Ethan confronted his closest friends. No one confessed. No one laughed in a way that hinted guilt. And more importantly, no one had the discipline to keep a prank going so long without cracking. Students lost interest quickly. Jokes died out within days. This was different. This was persistent. One evening in October, Ethan entered his dorm to find the red light blinking on his answering machine. He pressed the button and listened as one message after another played. Each one held that same robotic voice, but now the statements had grown more personal. The caller referenced times of day, the fact that Ethan hadn't answered his phone earlier, and specific nights when Ethan had been out of the dorm. Ethan felt the first genuine flicker of fear. By November, the calls had become routine. He no longer jumped when the phone rang. Instead, dread settled over him like a cold fog. His grades slipped. His sleep suffered. He began skipping classes to avoid leaving evidence of his schedule. Tyler noticed the change, watching Ethan grow quieter, jumpier, more withdrawn. And then, winter break arrived, an empty stretch of weeks where Ethan tried to reset. He avoided telling his family, worried they'd brush it off or blame his slipping GPA on stress. When he returned to campus in January, he promised himself he would turn everything around. But on his first night back, the phone rang again. The voice had changed. Not in tone, but in content. Now it referenced his hometown, his family, his parents' street, details he had never shared publicly. The fear that followed was no longer mild or dismissible. It rooted itself in him, tightening around his mind like a coil. Someone had information they shouldn't have. Someone had been paying attention. Another shift happened not long after. The messages grew darker, filled with strange descriptions of things the caller planned to do or bring. None of it made complete sense, but the intention behind the fragmented sentences was unmistakable. The voice claimed closeness, fascination, and something like ownership. By February, Ethan's dorm became a minor spectacle. Friends of friends stopped by to listen to the answering machine, their faces pale as they absorbed the mechanical tone and sinister familiarity. Rumors spread across campus about the student with the stalker. Some treated it like entertainment. Others kept their distance. Then came the night that changed everything. One weekend in late March, Ethan and a group of friends were drinking at a nearby motel. Everyone was loud and careless, and Ethan wasn't drinking much, tired of feeling out of control. When his friend Mark passed out after finishing an entire bottle, Ethan took the keys to Mark's truck, planning to drive himself back to campus and return the vehicle in the morning. He made a wrong turn. What should have been a straightforward route back became a disorienting drive through open farmland. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, surrounded by darkness so complete it felt like water pooling against the windows. Eventually, he reached a four-way stop nestled in the middle of those empty fields, one of those strange intersections that seemed too isolated to belong anywhere. He paused there for only a moment. The night was still, the air unmoving. Not a single car passed. He continued driving and eventually found his way back. A few days later, the robotic voice left another message on the answering machine. It referenced the exact time Ethan had been at the four-way stop. The words were precise. The moment was unmistakable. The realization hit Ethan like a punch. The caller wasn't guessing. The caller had been there, or watching, or tracking him somehow. As April approached, the messages became nearly constant. 10 calls a day, 15, sometimes more. The answering machine filled with the mechanical cadence of someone who sounded less human with each passing week. Then one evening, a new message arrived, a single statement that fixed a date, a place, and an hour. The caller intended to meet him in person. Midnight, outside a campus building called Marlowe Hall. Ethan knew he couldn't ignore it. Word spread quickly among the dorms, and dozens of students buzzed with adrenaline, offering to back him up. Follow the caller, catch him in the act. By the time evening arrived, nearly 70 guys were crammed into the common area, fueled by bravado and the thrill of confronting something strange. But most drifted away as the hour approached. Only about 20 remained, standing inside the lobby with the doors propped open, ready to run out if anything happened. Ethan walked alone across the courtyard. The air was cold. The campus lights cast long shadows across the pavement. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground resisted him. Halfway across the courtyard, he noticed movement in the corner of his vision. A figure crouched in the dim area near a smashed light bulb outside Marlowe Hall. The person wore dark clothes and a hood body partially hidden by the bushes and the building's pillars. Ethan shouldn't have been able to see him at all, but a slight shift exposed the silhouette. The figure rose slowly. Ethan felt a surge of panic and instinct took over. He sprinted toward the shape. The hooded figure bolted. They raced along the side of the building, Ethan closing the distance with pure adrenaline. But as the figure rounded the corner, Ethan saw something that froze him mid-stride. A dark van sat idling in the parking lot. Its brake lights glowed dimly. The side door was already open. A second person stood inside the van, and a third figure waited in the driver's seat. The hooded stalker launched himself into the van just as Ethan reached the edge of the building. The door slammed shut, and the vehicle peeled out of the lot with violent urgency, disappearing down the road in seconds. Silence followed, raw, overwhelming silence. When Ethan's friends caught up, breathless and stunned, none of them spoke. They stared at the empty lot, at the faint tire marks on the asphalt, trying to comprehend what they'd just witnessed. Then Ethan noticed something else. At the place where the hooded figure had crouched earlier, a small tripod stood hidden between the shrubs and the concrete pillar. A video camera sat on top of it, still recording. Its lens pointed directly at the spot where Ethan had been expected to stand at midnight. The realization settled over him like ice. The caller hadn't simply wanted to meet him. The caller had planned to film him, to capture whatever was supposed to happen next. The university never learned who the stalker was. The calls stopped after that night. No van was found. No suspects. No explanations. Years later, even after serving in the military and learning how people can track each other with frightening precision, Ethan still couldn't understand how the voice had known so much. He only knew that something deeply calculated had been watching him silently, patiently, and far too closely. Not a ghost, not a haunting, yet somehow more chilling than any paranormal story. Because the most terrifying part wasn't the calls. It was the van, the three men, the camera waiting for him, and the knowledge that for almost a full year, someone truly believed Ethan belonged to them. Story 4. The Person in the Trees. Mia had always preferred the quiet corners of the world. After years of non-stop work, she took a leave from her job and traveled to stay with a distant cousin near the edges of Quebec City. The area was surrounded by forests that felt older than anything she had ever known, dense, silent, and heavy, with the kind of stillness that settles deep into the bones of the earth. For Mia, who loved photography more than anything, it felt like the perfect place to breathe again. On her first week there, she discovered a strange formation deep in a nearby forest. The trees leaned inward over a narrow path, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a natural archway that looked like something pulled straight from a dark fairy tale. It was eerie, but beautiful, exactly the kind of setting she loved to capture on camera. One evening, just before sunset, she decided to photograph it. She drove a small rental car down a gravel road that wound beside the woods, parking near the entrance of the tree arch. The air smelled like pine and cold soil. The temperature dropped quickly as the sun began to fall, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Mia carried her tripod and camera gear with practiced ease. She positioned the tripod near the beginning of the archway, aiming her lens down the dark corridor of intertwined branches. The scene looked haunting in the fading light, like a place where the forest itself might swallow someone whole. She felt a thrill. This was the kind of moody, atmospheric shot she lived for. As she adjusted her settings, the crunch of gravel reached her ears. A second car pulled into the small turnout beside hers. A person climbed out, someone appearing to be a woman in a long coat with dark hair that reached her shoulders. The figure didn't approach Mia, but paced near the entrance of the path. She walked past the arch once, then again, each time slowing as she passed, watching Mia for much longer than seemed natural. Mia assumed the woman wanted to walk the path, but didn't want to interrupt the shoot. She ignored the glances, focusing on her work, waiting for the perfect moment when the sun dipped just right. 5 minutes later, the woman reappeared at the far end of the turnout. This time she moved toward Mia directly. The way she walked felt wrong. Her left leg dragged slightly, as if the joint didn't bend properly. Her upper body leaned into the motion, almost lurching with each step. The closer she came, the more Mia sensed something was off, though she couldn't explain what. The woman stopped staring at her without expression. Mia felt the hairs on her arms rise. As Mia began packing her equipment, preparing to leave if necessary, the figure bent toward the forest floor, grabbed a handful of dry leaves and tossed them into the air with an odd jerking motion. Then she drifted sideways, disappearing briefly behind the trees, her uneven footsteps scraping over branches. It was only when the figure turned again that Mia realized the truth. The hair was a wig. The person's features were masculine beneath it. The shape of the shoulders, the jawline. The strange stiffness in the limbs. It was a man dressed as a woman. A poorly executed disguise made all the more unsettling by the eerie behavior. A chill ran through her. She wasn't sure whether the man was confused, intoxicated, unstable, or something far worse. Instinct whispered that she needed to keep her distance, but she also didn't want to appear afraid. She held her tripod carefully in one hand, not dramatically, but in a way that would let her swing it if she needed to. After wandering into the trees, the man disappeared from sight. Mia waited, listening. A few minutes passed. The forest seemed to darken as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. She couldn't hear footsteps anymore, only rustling leaves and distant wind. She told herself not to panic. She tightened her grip on her equipment and returned to her camera, determined to squeeze in a few last shots before heading home. Photography often centered her. The simple routine of adjusting focus and exposure gave her something to cling to. But the forest didn't quiet in the way forests usually do at dusk. Instead, an irregular rhythm emerged, a faint rustling that circled around her position. Not animals. Animals move differently. This sounded like deliberate footsteps, shifting weight, breaking twigs. At times, the noise came from behind her, then from deeper within the trees, then from the opposite side, as though something or someone was slowly walking in loops, watching. 10 minutes passed. The footsteps continued. 5 minutes more. Then silence. A strange calm washed over the forest, the type of silence that makes the skin tighten in anticipation rather than relief. Mia exhaled shakily and began packing up her gear for real this time. She glanced toward the road. The second car was gone. She felt a wave of relief. Maybe the man had driven off while she was absorbed in her work. She lifted her bags and made her way out of the tree arch. But as she neared her, car movement on the gravel road caught her eye. A man was approaching, not the version she had seen earlier. The wig was gone, the long coat replaced. Now he wore ordinary men's clothing, a dark jacket, jeans, plain boots. Without the disguise, his features were sharper, clearer, harder. As he walked past her, he turned his head slightly and fixed his gaze on her. The expression he wore was a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes. The message behind it was unmistakable. Mia's pulse quickened. She kept the phone pressed to her ear. She had called a friend earlier to feel safer and maintained a steady pace toward her car. Her tripod was now slung over her shoulder like a warning. She didn't want him behind her for long. The forest felt darker than before. She climbed into her car, locked the doors, and started the engine. But as she glanced through the windshield, she saw the man now standing near the path she had just emerged from. His head turned slowly, scanning the empty turnout, then focusing on her vehicle. His posture shifted in a way that suggested purpose, as if deciding whether to approach. She lifted her phone and recorded a few seconds proof of what she saw in case something happened. Then she drove. As she passed the edge of the turnout, she finally caught sight of his car. It had been moved since earlier, drawn closer to the forest entrance, angled toward the direction she had been standing while photographing. She realized with a cold shudder that he must have repositioned it while circling her in the woods. Her throat tightened. If she had stayed any longer, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, she didn't want to imagine the possibilities. The woods were vast and empty. The sun had already disappeared. Her car was the only other presence for miles. And the strange man had already proven he was willing to change appearances, hide in the trees, and approach without hesitation. In the end, nothing happened. She escaped. The forest remained still behind her, but the dread never fully left. When she looks at photographs from that day, the image of the tree arch is beautiful, moody, dramatic, exactly what she wanted. But she never returns to that forest. The picture reminds her not of the trees, but of the quiet steps circling behind her, the sound of leaves being crushed, and the slow smile of a stranger who seemed to emerge directly from the shadows. Some places don't need ghosts or legends to feel haunted. Sometimes a single person is enough to turn a peaceful forest into a place no one should walk alone. Story 5. The Man on the School Stairs. Sarah was 6 years old the year everything in her life began to shift. Her parents' marriage had fallen apart during the months before she entered first grade, leaving the small house in a quiet Oklahoma town more chaotic than it had ever felt before. Her father moved out. Visitation changed to weekends, and her mother, exhausted, distracted, newly entangled in a relationship with someone else, seemed to drift further away each week. Sarah and her older sister walked to school most days, a route of 3 long blocks that felt endless to young legs. The road sloped gently downward toward Maple Ridge Elementary, a squat brick building with tall stairs leading to its double front doors. The school looked ordinary from a distance, but to a small child, the climb to the entrance felt monumental. Her mother used to walk them in. But after the divorce, morning routines became rushed and inconsistent. Some days her mother drove them. Some days they walked alone. And some days, like the one Sarah would remember for the rest of her life, her mother seemed too distracted to notice anything at all. On that morning, Sarah was late. Maybe there had been a dentist appointment, maybe a last-minute errand. She couldn't remember the reason. Only the feeling of arriving after the school day had already begun. The parking lot was quiet. The playground was empty. The long steps leading to the entrance stood still under the clouded sky. Her mother pulled the car over near the base of the stairs and told her to go ahead. Sarah hesitated, waiting for the familiar pause, the moment her mother watched her climb at least a few steps before driving off. But instead, the engine hummed, the car shifted forward, and her mother pulled away without looking back. Sarah stood alone on the sidewalk, small backpack hanging crookedly from her shoulders. She took a breath and turned toward the stairs. Before she could take her first step, she sensed movement behind her. Across the street, a car door shut. A man stepped out. He looked completely average. Mid-30s, perhaps. Clean shirt, neutral expression. The kind of man who would blend effortlessly into a row of parents waiting to pick up their children. For one fleeting moment, Sarah assumed he must have a child at the school. But something in the way he watched her so directly without hesitation sent a warm prickle of fear down her spine. He began crossing the street at an angle not toward the sidewalk or the building, but toward her specifically. Each step was too quick, too purposeful. The world suddenly felt too quiet. Sarah turned and began climbing the stairs. For a 6-year-old, the staircase was enormous, multiple landings separated by long flights of concrete steps. Each step felt taller than it really was, and she had to lift her legs high to keep moving. Fear gave her momentum she didn't know she had. She climbed faster than she had ever climbed anything in her life. Halfway up the first flight, she glanced over her shoulder. The man was no longer walking. He was running. His strides were long and heavy, his body leaning forward as he pushed himself toward her with unmistakable intent. He wasn't heading to the building. He wasn't looking for anyone else. His focus was entirely on her. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She turned and climbed faster. Her small shoes slapped hard against the concrete as she pushed upward, breath catching in her throat. The building loomed above her, the doors feeling impossibly far away. She reached the first landing. The man reached the base of the stairs. She started up the second flight. He ascended behind her with terrifying speed. The world narrowed to the rhythm of her feet, the frantic clatter of rubber soles, the harsh scrape of concrete, the rapid inhale and exhale of a child trying not to choke on her own fear. She didn't call out. She didn't look back again. Some instinct deeper than reason told her that looking back would slow her down, and slowing down meant something terrible. All that mattered was the door, the huge double doors at the top, the space behind them, the safety of adults and classrooms and fluorescent lights. The boundary between whatever waited outside and the world she understood. She pushed through the last steps, legs burning, breath shaking. When she reached the final landing, she threw her weight against the metal door. It opened with a heavy groan, and she stumbled inside the empty lobby of the school. Only then did she turn around. The man stood on the second flight of stairs, one level below her. He had stopped abruptly. His posture stiffened. His expression shifted from intensity to frustration, then to something resembling resignation. He stared directly at her through the narrow pane of glass in the door. For a moment, they simply watched each other. She could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He only stared, breathing hard from the chase. Then, he turned away. He descended the stairs quickly, walked back to his car and drove off, disappearing down the street as though nothing unusual had happened. Sarah remained inside the doorway, trembling, unable to move for several minutes. Her mind was too young to form explanations, but her instincts, raw and primal, had understood one thing with absolute clarity. Something very bad would have happened if she hadn't reached the doors in time. Later that morning, after she gathered enough courage to move again, she told her teacher what had happened. Her teacher listened carefully, her expression tightening with concern. A week later, a police detective arrived at the school to ask Sarah about the man, what he looked like, what he wore, whether he had tried to speak, whether she had seen his car clearly. The seriousness in the detective's voice made something inside her twist. She realized then that what happened wasn't just strange. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an overreaction from a nervous child. It was real, and the adults were worried. Sarah wouldn't learn anything more. No one told her if the man had been found or whether he had approached other children. Life went on at home as if nothing had occurred. Her mother never asked her for details. Her father wasn't told. But the memory never softened. As she grew older, the image returned to her with visceral clarity, the man stepping out of his car the moment she was left alone, the determined angle of his approach, the urgency in his pace, the heavy steps behind her. The instant he halted on the stairs when she slipped behind the heavy school door. It wasn't a ghost story. No haunted classroom. No paranormal presence, no supernatural omen. It was something much simpler and far more terrifying. A man, a moment of opportunity, and a child who happened to run fast enough. Most people fear the dark because they imagine monsters. Sarah grew up fearing something else. The ordinary moments that can turn dangerous without warning, and the strangers who move toward a child with too much intent. Even now, as an adult, she remembers that instinctive jolt of dread. The feeling that her body knew the truth, before her mind could understand it. Run. Now. Don't look back. And she is certain that listening to that instinct is what saved her life.